Okay, Laura, we'll call the meeting to order. Are you ready?
Dan will be the one that does the roll call.
No, I know, but I just want to make sure you're ready.
Oh, yep, I'm already recording.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Daniel, we'll call the meeting to order, and item number 1 on the agenda is the call to order, and number 2 is the roll call.
Okay, Director Cody.
Present.
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Zimmer.
Here.
Chair Ohilski.
Present.
All directors present.
Okay, so number 3 is board member comments. Does any board member have a brief comment that they'd like to communicate?
I do. This is Director Cody, and I'm concerned about the risk that COVID still presents itself to us. And today's newspaper indicated that COVID infections are increasing at a rate of 195% over recent 14-day measurement periods. So I recommend that the BMC continue to meet over the Zoom platform until either a larger percent of the population is vaccinated or the situation becomes substantially safer than it is now.
Okay, thank you, Charlie. Our next meeting is going to be September, so we'll see how it plays out at that time.
Yeah, Marshall, just to kind of respond to Cody a little bit. At Golden State, our office is still closed and we haven't returned to the office yet. So subject to change, but currently right now as we speak, we're still continue to work remotely.
Right. Well, and that's one of the reasons we didn't have the meeting in person this month. So.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Oh, somebody's buzzing here. Oh, whoever that was stopped it. Okay, seeing no other board member comments, number 4 is special presentation, which we have none of. And number 5 is the consent agenda. There's 2 items on the consent agenda. The approval of the minutes from 2016-2021 meeting and 2021 budget update and invoice register. Does anybody want to pull an item?
This is Cody. I'd like to discuss the way that the minutes are presented. And I don't know if that requires pulling that item out of the consent agenda or not.
I think that we could do that without pulling the item, to tell you the truth, because it doesn't seem to be, you're not talking about a substantive change to the minutes. You're just talking about the process.
That's correct.
Yeah, I think we can, if you want to make that comment now, that's fine before we go to public comment.
Okay. The meeting minutes, the transcription of the meeting minutes will never be perfect. And it's a difficult thing. These meetings last 3 hours or 3 hours plus. But because of that, I suggest that a header be added to the meeting minutes format that says something like, the following is a summary transcription of the meeting minutes, and a full audio recording of this meeting can be found at, and then provide a web link to where that can be obtained.
I think that's a great idea, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, and I'm supportive of that as well, Marshall and Charlie. You know, when we set this up, the formal record of our meeting is the recording. It was the video recording, as you know, when we started in person, and I assume that translates over to the recording that's done on Zoom. But I think it's key to understand that that's the formal record of our actions, and not the minutes, which are simply presented for convenience.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that. All right. So let's go to public comment on the consent agenda.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Is this where I can comment on the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I just noticed several comments from the last meeting were ignored or not put in, which actually a lot of them were. but I feel that they're pertinent to the discussion on the sustainability numbers as stated in the annual report. And these comments were actually by one of the purveyors was asked to be included in the minutes. So I'd like to just go over a few of the comments. Of course, I'm paraphrasing because the statements were long, but you can hear them all listening to the recording. So I'd like to start by saying, first of all, Charlie Cody asks, is it true that the Basin Management Committee has been making changes to the sustainable yield figure without going through the proper process as mandated by the stipulated judgment? Then Mark Zimmer asks, referring to the annual report, Marshall, how would we do an amended file? Would that take place before the 2022 or the 2021 annual report? And Marshall responds saying, yes, we could potentially do it prior to the next year's annual report. Mark Zimmer, I don't want to make decisions based on inaccurate information. So if we do direct staff, I want that done timely, and somehow I'm trying to get it so we're locked into having to do it, not that it'll be just some recommendation. And then Erica Stuckey, the attorney for Golden State, says, can I add one thing really quick? This is Erica. The sustainable yield is not being set as part of the approval of the annual report. Mark Zimmer says, Dan, can you make sure that we've at least got that documented correctly in our minutes? So we're memorializing our understanding. So these understandings that Mark talks about, I think need to be incorporated into the minutes. So I ask that the minutes as written not be approved. Thank you.
All right, Babak, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I want to quickly go over two topics. First is the summary of my own personal comments, which frankly, the way they're depicted here, they don't make any sense. The gist of my comments were that under the Basin Plan, one of the BMC's primary responsibilities is to implement water conservation measures. And I pointed out that the BMC has not actively been implementing this program or overseeing the county's program, and that the county is essentially using the retrofit program to approve new development, which will not achieve the goal of actually reducing the overall consumption as is required by the Basin Plan. So I urge the BMC to ask the county to halt issuing new permits that rely on retrofit and until there's a clear plan for implementing conservation measures. So that really isn't reflected. And I would like to suggest that the BMC consider actually including transcripts instead of having the audio files, because audio files, it take a while to listen to, and it's hard to find exactly what you're looking for. And with today's technology, the cost of transcription has gone down substantially. The other important issue I wanted to touch on is that the discussion of the approval of the 2020 annual report and the discussion of sustainable yield was not really accurate. So Patrick really covered this, a lot of this, but I think it would be appropriate for the minutes to reflect the fact that the committee understood this number not to be, that would not be and should not be used for planning purposes. So the minutes claim that the vote was with the understanding that the submission of the report did not amount to an understanding that you guys were setting or evaluating or affirming the sustainable yield. But really the problem is that that's not reflected. It may be reflected now in the minutes, but it's not really reflected in the annual report, which actually it contradicts the annual report, because the annual report specifically requires that each annual report address the sustainable yield issue. So I don't honestly know how what was discussed here last time with this understanding that we're not setting sustainable yield can be reconciled with what the court understands to be at least a part of, or one of the most important features of the sustainable use. Okay.
All right, thank you. Larry, you're able to speak. Oh, sorry, that noise is still going. I apologize. Okay, now you're good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, Larry Rayo with the sustainability.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, I'm just going to ask you not to approve the minutes either, because there's many inconsistencies with the notes as presented here and our transcripts. You know, our group took hours and hours to transcribe this so that we could review what was being said closely, which, as Bob just said, I think is important. You know, it's hard to go through audio recording and you know, figure out everything and find things, you know, once you've come across stuff, you know. So anyway, it's my opinion that these minutes do not accurately account for all that transpired during that meeting. So again, I ask that you do not approve these minutes and that you go back through. And I think we provided you a transcript, you know, and update these minutes to be more reflective of what actually occurred last meeting. Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hey, good afternoon. I completely support that the transcript tells a completely different story from what the minutes show, and whether we add the transcript to the minutes or correct them so that they cover issues that really leave me questioning what happened during that last meeting. So anyway, I don't think the minutes are complete enough. If an outsider was looking at them, they might get a completely different take on what transpired. So I support improvement and amendments to the meeting minutes. Thank you.
There's no other public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Okay, I'll bring it back to the committee. I would just make one response to Patrick. Erica Stuckey is county counsel, not counsel for Golden State. So I just wanted to clarify that. So what do you guys want to do here?
Marshall, if you don't mind, I'd like to
Yeah,
weigh in
Dan,
on this
go
issue a
ahead.
little bit and just provide some of the background. So obviously we're working through somewhat of a transition with how we manage the meeting minutes for the BMC. When I first took over, the BMC had made a decision to use the recorded version as the official transcript, and the meeting minutes just included description of BMC direction or action as kind of a documentation of the formal proceedings of the meetings. Then there was a direction from the BMC to add additional description of what was occurring during the meetings. And so what we have for the meeting minutes in this agenda packet in the last couple of meetings is an attempt at a compromise between a full transcription and a very streamlined or summary of the formal actions. I would agree that this compromise does present some challenges with how you capturing portions of the dialogue, but not all the dialogue. And so I would be open to a discussion about alternate approaches. Looking into full transcripts, I think could be an option. We would have to determine how much that would cost and whether or not that was worth doing. My understanding of the transcript that was developed for the sustainability group did take many hours to prepare and wouldn't be something that the executive director and his team would be able to do with the existing budget, but maybe there are lower cost transcription services out there, or we could return to where we started a year and a half ago, where the recording is the formal record and the meeting minutes really just reflect action and direction.
Thank you, Daniel.
Mr. Chairman, this is Bruce. I would only observe that the recording is the formal record of this committee. this committee's action. I think we need to agree on that first and foremost.
Yeah, well, I think that that's clear. The question is, how do we want to proceed? Do we want to, I mean, there's really two questions. Do you want to approve these as presented? And then second of all, how do we want to proceed in the future? So I think there's really two questions before us right now.
This is Cody again. I think at the very minimum, I guess I would like to see the minutes revised with the heading that we discussed earlier in director comments, and to add Bruce's comment that the real and true record of what took place at the meetings is contained in the audio recording available at a specific location. I understand what the sustainability group is, what they want, and it's that document that they produce, a very nice description that they produced was a very long document. And it's going to make the, it would be nice to be able to do that, but I guess I'd like to hear a discussion among the other committee members about whether we want to really add that many pages to the agenda packages or not.
So this is Mark. I think if we're going to discuss the agenda as we are right now, it needs to be pulled.
Well, I think Mark, I was going to say that we may want to, I don't, because I don't think that that's really what the agenda item reads. So I think we would maybe have to continue this and, just go forward or just not approve this and discuss it in our meeting in 2 months. I mean, I just don't think that we're prepared to have this substantive discussion. As Daniel said, he'd have to get us a, cost estimate and that kind of stuff first, so we could have some idea of how to proceed. So,
Marshall,
Yeah.
This is Bruce. I think we can direct staff to prepare the minutes however we want. It's in the approval of the minutes that this board takes action, and that's agendized every month.
right.
So, I'm easy at whatever my colleagues would like to do about modifying these minutes. But I think Charlie's onto something here in terms of making sure we point people to what the actual record is. I would suggest we just dispose with decide what we want to do about these minutes. And again, I'm flexible as to the will of the group here. By the nature of this hybrid model, we're never going to completely characterize every comment to everybody's satisfaction. So however folks want to modify these, if in fact they want to modify them, is fine. I again do endorse the heading that Charlie wants to put on there. And then after we do that, we'll see if there's consensus on directing staff as to how to proceed.
Yeah, and I would say that that heading that Charlie proposed as we should not only reference that, but we should also reference where the location of that is, like on the county's website, and then also reference the staff reports for that previous meeting, because I think that would be also good background information. So yes, what Bruce said is correct. How do we want to deal with these minutes?
I agree with what's been mentioned previously. I have a concern. I share the concern that someone just looking at these minutes could mistakenly think that that's a historically correct version of what took place at the last meeting. And I'm concerned about that because there are significant errors and omissions in these minutes. I'll just leave it at that for now. I'd be willing to reject these minutes to improve them or to just to change them to replace this header indicating that they're not accurate or representative. And for an accurate representation, please see the recorded minutes on the website.
Well, I wouldn't say they're not accurate. I would just say they're more of a summary rather than a detailed.
I think that there are inaccuracies and important omissions.
Well, if there's inaccuracies, then I think we need to correct those. That's my opinion. Well, we got to do something here, people. What do you want to do with the minutes?
I mean, one option is we do have what has been provided as a more detailed transcript of what was stated during the previous meeting. That, for at least for this meeting, could be used as a template for updating these minutes to be more comprehensive. Obviously, would need to be verified, against the recording. But that could be an option for moving forward with these minutes. And then the BMC could make a decision on how to approach future minutes, either now or at a future meeting.
Another thing we could do, Marshall, is to convert these minutes to action minutes. That's the format that the board of supervisors uses. Our recordings are the formal record of the board. We prepare action minutes, which simply indicates what actions were taken and who spoke on what item. So that would be another option. Again, I'm at the pleasure of my colleagues on how we proceed with this set of minutes.
Yeah, Bruce, actually, I think Bruce's comment may be the way to go for this month's meeting minutes, to add the header and then say that these are action items, and then to change the minutes to reflect that. That's an approach that may be the best approach, quite frankly. Mark, you were going to say something, I hope?
Well, I agree with that approach. I think that if we pull them now and do the revisions as you stated, we could bring it back to the next meeting and have it corrected and approved at that point.
Mark, your microphone is starting to give off some background noise, just as a heads up.
Yeah, Laura, that's the noise I was referring to, and the reason I wanted to call in. So I'm going to call in with the last four digits of 2287.
Okay, I will move you over. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think we'll wait till Mark gets back on, but I think maybe what I'm going to do is bifurcate these consent items, and then we'll take separate votes on the two.
Marshall, if you want to get through that part of it, we can probably deal with the noise so we can continue with the meeting.
Okay. So can I have somebody make a motion relative to the approval of the minutes? Yes, no, something?
I guess then if we're going to do that, then I would say that S&T would vote to not approve the minutes as presented.
Okay, but I need a motion.
Okay, I make a motion that we do not accept the minutes as presented.
And to be amended and presented back to the committee at our next meeting. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that sounds good.
Is there a second to that?
I will second that.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, Laura, can you take a vote for me, please?
One second before we take the vote, should we also approve the budget in the same?
I was doing these two separate.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Or we can make the budget approval as part of the motion if you'd want. However you.
Let's continue as
Okay. All right, Laura, can you take the vote, or Dan, whoever's going to take the vote, please?
Yeah, I can do the roll call. Director Cody,
I approve the motion as presented.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair O'Hilsky.
Yes. Okay, now I need a motion on item B, which is the 2021 budget update and invoice register. I have a motion on that, please.
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second, please?
I second the motion to approve the Part B.
Okay, thank you. Any more discussion? Okay, can we have a vote then, Daniel, please?
Yeah, Director Cody,
Yes.
Director Gibson,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair O'Hilsky.
Yes. Okay, so just so as far as what we want him to bring back at our next meeting, are we all on the same page? Daniel, do you think you understand?
My understanding is we would bring back a version of the minutes that would have the header that describes that the official record is the recording of the meeting, the location of that recording, and then conversion of the meeting minutes to action minutes. And so therefore removal of much of the comment and dialogue and just a description of the actions that were taken during the meeting.
That agreeable?
I'm agreeable with that.
I think we would lose a lot doing that, and maybe going forward, that's a possibility. Is there any possibility that the committee would accept using for this time, for the last meeting only, the transcription made by the sustainability group?
We would have to double check that whole transcript. Not that I'm saying it's wrong, but we can't take an outside third party, it has to be our responsibility.
Yes, yes.
I mean, I think for that meeting, I don't, we need input from Mark and Bruce.
Is Mark still on? I defer
Yeah,
to Mark.
Mark's back. He's back. He's just doing the phone now.
Well, no, I haven't logged off yet because I was trying to make it through this item so I could
Oh.
log off and call in.
Well, the noise is gone, so you can,
My voice is gone right now.
now it's back.
So I think, what we've discussed and worked through is the fact that the recording is our minutes. I just really don't want some of our discussion and our intent to get taken out of context and certain sentences or words be used in a way that are out of context. And so that was my concern. I like having the recording. If we need to go back and clarify something, we can do that. And really the action items are moving forward. What I would do is, before approving those action item minutes, as we're doing right now, confirm that those actions are accurate and that intent is correct. So
Marshall, I'm sorry, Mark, go ahead.
that I'm done, Bruce. Thank you.
So, maybe a simple way to do it that would be consistent elsewhere in the county would simply be to have Dan or staff consult the format of the minutes that the Board of Supervisors puts out. That's what we're really talking about when we talk about action minutes, that are a summary of the official record being whatever recording is made. Maybe it's simplest direction to Dan to have a look at Board of Supervisors minutes and revise these minutes to be consistent with that format.
I would support that.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned that, for instance, last meeting is a good example of a meeting where there were substantial numbers of issues raised that would not be apparent to someone reading action formatted minutes. But I understand that to then begin to try to create a hybrid of action minutes then creates other problems. I'm a little torn with it, but
Yeah, Charlie, that's what I was torn with also, is the hybrid and the interpretation and what is actually put in there. I think we can do just as much harm and be just as much misleading by putting inaccurate information in a hybrid form.
that's true. I agree with that.
So why don't we, here's my thoughts. Why don't we go ahead and go with the action item minutes and the header as was discussed, and then have Dan look into the possibility of doing the cost of doing transcripts for the meeting for discussion at our next meeting.
Is that, I mean, you're saying convert, Marshall, just so I understand your position on this, which would be to revise these minutes to be action minutes and move forward on that basis, and at some later date consider whether transcription makes sense.
Well, I was thinking we'd have the action item as the minutes, and then at some future date, we would also have not only the video available, but also transcripts available.
Okay. As long as that discussion's in the future, I think that's fine. I think your observation about needing to confirm the accuracy of the transcript is a good one.
So that would be, I mean, if we want to do that, go, to direct Daniel to revise these to be action minutes and then add the header to it, and then have a discussion next meeting on including a physical transcript on the website. I think that's what I would like to do, but I need somebody to make a motion somehow.
Well, and with that approach, Marshall, I mean, if it was the desire of the BMC, that a transcript could be made for the previous meeting minutes at the BMC's direction. So just because we don't do it this time doesn't mean we couldn't go back and develop a transcript for last month's meeting.
Well, I'd like to put that off till a future discussion, because I don't want to just do it for one meeting. If we're going to do it, I think we need to do it consistently.
Agreed. Yeah. If the direction was to develop full transcript minutes moving forward, it could also be applied retroactively to a couple of the meetings of concern.
Right. I totally agree with that. So are you guys, somebody going to make a motion to do something here, please?
Yeah, how about this? I'd like to make a motion that the meeting minutes for the prior meeting will be reformatted and represented at the next BMC meeting for an approval vote.
Reformatted in accordance with the direction or the discussion by the committee. Is that your motion?
Marshall, I think we already had a motion. We already had a motion on the floor, and then we expanded our discussion on that motion, and now we have a second motion in front of us.
Okay, well.
And maybe I'll withdraw that. Maybe you can explain, Mark, what the present motion is. I apologize for that.
What I recall the present motion was that we would pull the minutes till next meeting. We would add the heading as we discussed in the notation, and then we would add the action minutes to the in place of the modified version of the minutes.
I think that's correct. We were just discussing that, so if everybody's comfortable that we've discussed this enough, we can take a vote on it.
So Yeah, but I do think it warrants additional discussion at a future date. I do like that.
Definitely. We'll agendize that at the next meeting. And in the interim, Dan will look into the cost of actually having a physical transcript prepared.
Correct. Sounds good.
Okay, so Daniel, you want to take a vote, please?
I guess, Claire, do we need to take a vote on that? I mean, we voted to reject the minutes and to amend them and bring them back, and then we were getting staff providing
This is
directions
just
to
staff
staff.
direction. Okay,
Yeah.
if it's just staff direction, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure that it was clear what we were doing.
And I'm willing to do a roll call. I'm just trying to understand policies and procedures.
If everybody's comfortable that that was the direction the staff under the motion, then we can move forward.
Yes, I'm happy with that.
Okay, I just wanted to make it clear that what we were doing. Okay,
Yes,
so
that's fine.
okay, so we'll go forward with that, and then next meeting we'll have an agendized item to discuss doing actual physical transcripts of the meeting and the cost and how that works for next meeting.
And
Okay.
One point of clarification for this meeting minutes, I would presume to use the same approach, a header and action minutes until we
Correct.
make further decisions and provide additional direction.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to item number 6, public comments for items not appearing on the agenda. Again, this is for items not on the agenda.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please press *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. Lindy Dowd, you're able to speak.
Thank you. This is Lindy Dowd, Lindidoud, Los Osos. First of all, thank you for watching the coronavirus trends and using adaptive management to keep these meetings on Zoom for the time being for everyone's safety. As you know, the coronavirus shares the current news headlines with another trend that is befalling us at lightning speed. That is the mega drought besieging us and the entire West. Less overall precipitation, hotter temperatures, and drier conditions are the future we're all facing that is becoming the new normal. No longer can we look to the past to predict the future. I am very concerned that climate change has snuck up on us and become a key factor in the future sustainability of our basin and our community. The current basin model is using metrics based on the past, and those will not preserve our basin for the future. Not only does the model need to be updated accordingly, but the Los Osos Community Plan and the Growth Management Ordinance do as well. We're entering into an unprecedented future weather-wise. Water conservation will be critical for survival. The county must enact programs and ordinances that require all ag wells to be metered and all irrigation systems to be the most efficient available. All conservation measures for our community must be acted upon. Water use, both indoors and outdoors, must be as conserving as possible. If homes over the basin haven't yet been completely retrofitted, they must now be required to do so. And it must be understood that conserving water in our basin is for the sustainability of the basin, not for development. I know this committee cannot legislate, but you can certainly assess the trends and use adaptive management to take bold, decisive action to save our basin for the existing community, such as maximizing water conservation, reassessing all basin metrics in the most conservative way, metering all wells, and refusing water service to new development. As a nation, we've fallen behind on addressing climate change and are now dealing with changing weather conditions because of it. As a community, let's not fall behind in addressing these changing weather conditions at the cost of our basin. Thank you.
All right, Larry, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Larry Rayo here. Well said, Lindy. I agree with everything that you said. You know, looking into the future, I think that a community that has their own reliable source of water is going to be the envy of other communities. With current water shortages happening throughout the state and the country, many of which rely on outside unreliable sources of water, we have an opportunity here to provide our community with a reliable, life-giving resource of water for now and well into the future. And I know, there's been talk about outside water for Los Osos, but I think it's a bad idea. And we need to treat this resource that we have here with the utmost respect. And this has been put into your hands to make happen. So I just ask that you please do the best that you can with this precious resource. Thank you.
All right, Deborah, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Deborah Howe with the LOCAC Ad Hoc Water Committee. I actually have 4 questions, and a couple of them are legal questions. So if you're not able to answer these questions today, I'd appreciate if you could get back to me either via email or by phone. So question number 1, what is the status of the electrical resuscitivity study by Cal Poly? Question number 2, it's my understanding that if we were under Sigma, there would be certain funding mechanisms available to pay for the maintenance of the basin. What are the mechanisms available to pay for surveys such as the AEM and the TTEM? And then the couple of legal questions. Under Sigma, there are certain triggers that would cause the state to step in. Since we are adjudicated and not under Sigma, what legal or regulatory ramifications are there if the BMC does not manage the basin in a sustainable way? And last question, is it possible to resolve the ISJ and return to status under Sigma? Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Eve, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Eve Grunfest. I'm going to reiterate what most people have just said in the last few comments. The drought is severe. The drought is expected to extend into the upcoming rain season. There's so much uncertainty about the status of our groundwater. The Basin Management Committee needs to know where our water is going and how much is being used. We know how much water is being used by most of the residential neighborhoods of our community that are served by our 3 water purveyors because we're metered. We've replaced our older brick water fixtures, we've taken out lawns, we take shorter showers, we flush our low flow toilets, and we're conserving our residential water use. Yet we have seawater coming into our basin and nitrates from hundreds of septic tanks polluting our basin too. We don't know how much water is unmetered that's being extracted. How can a safe yield for our basin be accurately estimated if half the water being extracted by agriculture and other uses isn't measured? The Basin Management's primary responsibility is to implement the Basin Plan. All water use must be metered. SLO County wants major new housing in Los Osos. The county doesn't believe that the Basin Management Committee and the particular water purveyors will step up and refuse to issue will-serve permits. After 6 years of managing our basin, have any bold, decisive, and immediate actions, as the BMC was intended to make, have been taken? Insisting that the unmetered wells be metered would be a great first bold step. The science and engineering reports that the BMC must use to guide its decisions agree that the only way we can not move forward with the moratorium, keeping the moratorium and getting more certainty about our water is if we use magical thinking. And that's just not the way the BMC should work. Thank you.
All right, Lindy Owen, you just have to unmute yourself.
Lindy Owen, I totally agree with Lindy Dowd and Larry's comments, as well as everything else, Eve's also. One thing that concerns me is that the county is not presenting all new permits coming through. They're going into a ministerial process, which basically allows the county to make decisions about what's approved and not approved. The way way to get in and look at ministerial permits is difficult, complicated, and very incomplete. So I would ask, hey, I'm sorry. I would ask that the Basin management put pressure on the county, to begin, I'm sorry. Could I start over after I get the dogs quieted?
Marshall, that would be your decision.
I can continue right now, but I lost.
Okay, go for it, Lindy.
I'm sorry. So this ministerial permit activity that's going on means that very few permits come before the LOCAC land use. Therefore, we have no idea what is being permitted, and it's very difficult to find out the gist of what permits are being approved by the county. Again, level 3 severity, we are moving into a new era of climate change, and the drought is predicted to be far more serious. I think it's time for a building moratorium of some kind, because we don't have a model to know what the next 5 years are going to be. I also wanted to just say that I thought that the last 2 meetings back that we decided that action items were not adequate for our meeting minutes. And so I don't know why we're thinking of going back to them. And I think the transcripts are correct. I've looked at them, and I believe that we need to continue adding them on as a PDF. It doesn't need to be a long document, but it will allow people to go in and not spend hours listening to these meetings. So I'll just add in that I think getting the transcripts done, whether sustainability groups has to take action to do them, but they should be included in the minutes. So those are my comments. I definitely approve of getting the meters on the private wells. Go drive around and look at how many nice lawns, how much watering is going on outside of the prohibition zone. I think you'll be a little bit surprised and shocked, and we need to know how much water they are taking out of our basin if we're ever going to balance it. Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards, and we all know that the Los Osos groundwater basin is the sole source of water for our urban uses and our agricultural and community demands. As such, we're challenged with that one source or single source of water. The county right now is crafting a water resiliency plan that underscores that fact, and Los Osos is on a short list of communities that have only one source. Concurrently, the County Board of Supervisors, acting as the County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, is trying to figure out what to do with 15,000 acre-feet of unallocated state project water. And in fact, they'll have a meeting. The next one is August 10th. Given the changed circumstances today and our challenges facing the management of the basin, I think it's time that we explore imported water, specifically state project water. And if you look in the basin plan, and for those of you who read it in detail, you'll know that in chapter 12, there's a fairly broad discussion about the importation of state project water. And in that chapter, it presents a number of challenges, and I'd submit to you that many or all of them have either can be addressed or it's more timely to address them now. For example, it was thought that a 2-mile stretch from Los Osos to Morro Bay was going to present environmental challenges. I think we can address those and co-locate facilities. It was thought that the Chorro Branch and Chorro Valley pipeline lacked capacity. Well, that's not true. In a WSC Tech memo dated December of 2011, 2,642 additional acre-feet of capacity is available. There are legal agreements that certainly need to be worked out. And the cost, was a big factor in that analysis. But it's not 1,000 acre-feet, which is discussed in the basin plan. We're contemplating something on the order of 300 to 500 acre-feet. So, and as to the cost, which was specified at about $20,000 an acre foot, that's simply out of control. And I think we can make wholesale purchases of water. So the bottom line is this needs to be analyzed. A presentation should be made, or I'd ask that the BMC ask that a presentation be made by the County Public Works Department to do that analysis. They have folks in their department that are versed in the state project water, and I'd ask that it be agendized and the County Public Works staff make a presentation on the options. Thank you.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I too would like to start by thanking the BMC for putting our safety first and Zooming these meetings where the public is allowed to make their comments in the safety of their own home. As Lindy Dowd had said, this pandemic is by no means over, and I hope that the Board of Supervisors will take your lead in doing this. To start with, in the stipulated judgment on pages 10 and 11, it says that, and I quote, "In every year since at least 1979, conditions of overdraft have existed continuously, which has caused the adverse effect of seawater intrusion into the lower aquifer with no temporary periods of surplus groundwater being available," end of quote. Yet in that period and into the 80s, the Board of Supervisors approved the largest building boom and increase in the Los Osos population in the community's history. I know Director Gibson was not a supervisor at the time, but decisions made by that board run with that board. And to this day, we still do not have empirical data that shows there is surplus groundwater available to support additional growth. Yet the current Board of Supervisors keep supporting more growth in Los Osos. Maybe Supervisor Gibson could comment on why. Lastly, our basin has had seawater intrusion for over 40 years, and I'll comment further on this issue when it comes up on the agenda. But as it relates to just what I've been speaking about, the definition of safe yield is that it does not cause undesirable effects of seawater intrusion, a byproduct of overdraft. We haven't had a functioning safe yield in our basin for over 40 years. Think about that. Regardless of what the sustainable yield has been estimated to be, the basin has experienced seawater intrusion the whole time. A safe yield might be as low as 1,800 acre feet yearly or below, but it's definitely not 2,760 as stated in the AMRs. Thank you.
Lynette, you just have to unmute yourself.
I just wanted to thank the Basin Management Committee for all of the work that they do. I think you're all highly intelligent people. You are going to figure out issues we are being presented with today. And I just feel like enough people don't thank you for all the work that you do. I know it's a ton of work. I know staff does a ton of work, and it's not going unnoticed. So thank you very much.
All right, Babak, you just have to unmute yourself.
Okay, good afternoon again. This is Babak Nafisi. I'm an attorney and I work with the Los Osos Sustainability Group. What I wanted to bring up today is something that I think was alluded to before. I think the BMC ought to seriously consider how it can have its own counsel to help it navigate through the legal issues that come up and have been coming up, and also have plagued the BMC's activities, it seems like, from the beginning. This issue that we're going to get into more later about the 2017 adoption of a safe yield that was not consistent with the procedure and requirements of the stipulated judgment in the Basin plan, quite possibly could have been avoided if there was counsel who scrutinized the activities of the group. And I think it's quite common for a committee of charged with such important responsibilities and having to comply in detail with the provisions of a stipulated judgment in the Basin Plan ought really to have its own counsel. And in case that the consideration would be that, county council can actually advise this group, I don't think that's legally or practically advisable, because as much as the county and the BMC obviously have common goals, at the end of the day, there does seem to be some tension between what the county is doing and its goals and aspirations and this body's sort of strict responsibilities and discretion under the stipulated judgment. Now, I'm not sure how the budgetary issues allow this to happen. I'm not really well versed in sources of income or sources of money that may be available to the BMC, but I really think that this issue deserves some discussion. Thank you.
There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, thank you. The 4 questions that were asked up front, I'm going to defer those legal questions to legal counsel, so we'll get an answer back to her at a later date, because I think they were more complicated than just the off the top of our head discussion. But the 2 questions about the Cal Poly study and the mechanism available for services, Daniel, do you want to discuss those?
Yeah, I can respond to those. So BMC staff and party staff are still in discussions with the Cal Poly professor about the potential to do what we call land-based geophysics. We're still working through some property ownership and environmental constraints. And so we don't have necessarily a formal determination on the ability to move that forward yet, but it's something that the staff is working on. And I think the second question, if I understood it correctly, that, if the basin was under Sigma, there would be additional funding mechanisms, both in terms of grant funding opportunities, but there are also additional regulatory fee funding mechanisms that were made available to groundwater sustainability agencies through Sigma that aren't available to the Basin parties or the BMC parties as I understand it.
Okay.
And Marshall?
Yeah.
This is Bruce. Could I just add on that aerial electromagnetic survey, just to finish that one off, we have concluded our conversations with DWR, and they are not going to add Los Osos to their flight paths in this go round. We'll continue to have conversations with them about the possibility in the future, but being in an urban area, it's also a bit constrained. So that doesn't look promising anytime in the near future.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Bruce. Anybody else have?
And we can have a additional dialogue around that in the executive director's report.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 7, the executive director's report. Daniel?
Thank you, Marshall. Yes, item number 7, executive director's report. I just want to provide a couple in funding and financing updates. The first one is with respect to the Prop 1 groundwater grant program. The third solicitation round for that program is currently out, with the state board accepting concept proposals for that program. Unfortunately, Los Osos is not in a good position to pursue funding from that program at this time for a number of reasons. One, the BMC pursued funding from that program in round 1, but were informed that projects to relocate pumping were not eligible, didn't fit within the goals and objectives of that program. And that because they weren't necessarily directly targeted at protection or cleanup of groundwater. Other projects, including the Basin Plan, more specifically Program B, that would include wellhead treatment of nitrates, could have been a potential project within that program. But unfortunately, with this being the third and final round, the program is only looking to fund implementation projects, of which Program B is not considered implementation ready at this point, meaning that it doesn't have a design, it hasn't gone through the CEQA or other environmental processes, and is not ready for construction. So I think unless there are reallocations of funding to this program, I don't know that this is going to be a viable funding program for the BMC moving forward. However, I do have an update on the State Water Resources Control Board Water Recycling Program planning grant program, and we talked about this program with the BMC a little over a year ago. This is an opportunity to obtain planning funding as long as there's a nexus to a recycled water planning study. And so there are a number of opportunities to pursue funding from this program to fund ongoing BMC or potential future BMC initiatives, most specifically potentially a development of a transient groundwater model. The real update on this program is that through recent communications with the state board representatives, confirmed that their funding program is still fully funded and these grants are available. I additionally learned that they've also changed their rules such that agencies can begin tracking costs and receive reimbursement of costs through this program from the date that the application for this program is submitted. So it appears that they've also, in addition to increasing the funding amount, which they did a year or two ago, they have also taken steps to increase the speed at which agencies can be eligible for that funding. So that funding could present opportunities for the BMC and will be part of the discussion of the calendar year 2022 budget. Moving down to Basin Plan implementation and funding plans. I just want to update the BMC that the Funding and Organizational Subcommittee Working Group is continuing to meet and make progress in evaluation of the different funding and organizational options available to the BMC to aid in basin monitoring and management and potentially implementation of additional basin programs. One of the primary tasks that we're focused on at this point is not necessarily identifying new options, because unfortunately we haven't necessarily identified new options other than those that have been previously presented to the BMC through the TOSIG report and other presentations, but finding ways to distill down the information and the options and the decision points associated with the available funding programs, and look forward to bringing that distilled summary to the BMC in hopefully a more accessible manner so that the BMC can make informed decisions about future funding and financing and governance opportunities. And then the last update, as you'll see in the Los Osos Wharf wastewater recycled water flows, we've got additional data provided by county public works utilities for the wastewater plant and the recycled water use for May and June of 2021. And a couple other things I just want to mention. They didn't come in necessarily in time to make it into the executive director's report, but one, I did receive an additional letter from the Los Osos Sustainability Group that may be part of the dialogue moving forward. Two, at the last BMC, there were questions about the existing nitrate monitoring program in the basin, and And that we'll be compiling that information and bringing that back to the BMC at a future meeting, hopefully at our next meeting. And then third, I wanted to talk a little bit about the geophysics initiative. As I described earlier, we're investigating multiple types of geophysics. What we've talked about with this group is the aerial and the potential to partner with DWR. We've also talked about the land-based opportunity. So there are some constraints associated with that. One thing I would like to inform the group is that Deborah shared with me a response that LOCAC had received from the DWR with respect to their letter that was submitted, and that response painted a potentially more favorable opportunity. Just paraphrasing the response was that Los Osos would not be included in the most recent or the upcoming AEM survey of Monterey and Paso, but could be included in the future survey, 2022 survey of the San Luis and San Ynez basins. There were some potential constraints in terms of what could be included in an AEM survey that would be done with those basins. There's description of only being able to do the inland portions and not necessarily being able to capture data on the coastal areas because of the amount of development and interference that could occur there. But there sounds like a potential opportunity that survey lines could be extended into portions of the Los Osos Basin when DWR flies the San Luis Obispo Valley Basin. And then finally, I've been recently made aware of a third opportunity or approach to geophysics. So we advance to the next slide. Lauren, it's termed float TEM geophysics. So it's not aerial based, it's not land based, but it's water based. And so you can see there's a mechanism. And if you go to the next slide, there's another image as well where the geophysics equipment can be towed by a boat and used to collect data for the underlying geology. And so this technology, and we're just becoming aware of this, we're not aware of its limitations, but does potentially present some opportunities for the Los Osos Basin and potentially the ability to collect geophysics data for portions of the basin that underlie the bay and could provide valuable information for the basin. So we'll be adding this new technology and potential opportunity to the dialogue and looking forward to bringing additional information back to the BMC in the future. And that concludes my executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Do we have any questions before we go to public comment? Okay, let's go to public comment, Laura.
And Mark, just because you're on your cell phone, it's *6 to unmute yourself. If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please press *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Jeff Edwards again, and I'd like to speak to two items on the ED report. The first one was the increased funding by the State Water Resources Control Board for planning grants to $150,000. I think this would be an opportunity to continue the work that the Basin Management Committee has already performed or had performed on the creek discharge. I don't know how much money was spent, but Michael Nunley and Associates was hired to do quite a feasibility analysis. And I think this is an opportunity to basically parlay that work and take the investigation further. To remind the committee, the creek discharge has always been contemplated as a discharge location in the summertime when the creek's not running. And it's most important to note that a disposal at that location realizes direct lower basin recharge because zones D and E sweep up in daylight at the creek bottom south of Los Osos Valley Road. So I'd urge the committee to pursue a planning grant for this purpose. Secondly, it's unclear to me what the working group is doing with regard to your funding and organizational questions. I will submit to you that the idea to create an organization to raise money to fund the administration of this committee is a non-starter. Moreover, this committee really doesn't have implementation costs other than monitoring wells and other, really, frankly, paper pushing. So it's clear that projects are going to actually, on the ground, water resource infrastructure projects are going to become the result of dollars that are going to come in part from existing ratepayers, but moreover, they're going to come from development. And I would direct your attention to the Los Osos Community Plan, Chapter 8, Public Facilities Financing. Review those options, and it's clear that the development-based funding by way of impact fees, connection fees, or developer dedications and contributions is the most significant source of funding for real water resource projects. So I don't know if you guys have Chapter 8, you're looking at it, this working group. I don't know if you've talked to the county, because in the administrative office, Carolyn Berg is the principal analyst for housing and infrastructure. Is she part of your discussion? I think you need an AB 1600 study, keep it narrow, keep it focused, and proceed. Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again. I again question if there would be grant funding that could extend towards when you talk about the recycled water options that might be coming forward, to go back and understand why we are not doing what was initially going to keep water in the basin, which was to implement ag exchange. A possible settling pond or anything to improve the quality of that water and lower the price so that the agriculture will stop pulling out drinking water for their crops would be a big plus, I believe, rather than send it all to Broderson in this odd experiment that we won't know the answer to for many years still. Again, I don't know if there could be grant funding towards the water metering of the 500 private wells. It's a known that once a well owner has a meter on their water use, they automatically lower it from 10 to 15% just because of the awareness that they are, and they also are included in the basin preservation that way. Again, I don't, as to Jeff's discussion about building more so we can get ourselves out of a water crisis, it just does not make sense. So I would love to understand where that makes any sense at all. And then with this geophysics project that Dan presented, the possibility of doing it over water, we saw the damage that the seismic testing would have done to the ocean bottom and all sea life and plants. So I would like to bring that into a major concern on my part. If you're doing echo testing to determine what freshwater we might have underneath our bay, I think we need to discuss how much damage it does to sea life and bay life, plants and fish. So I guess those are my comments. Thank you.
All right, Deborah, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Dan, for sharing that information from the letter that I received from the DWR. In fact, my second question was really regarding paying for surveys such as AEM. In other words, I felt there was a glimmer of hope in that response that there could possibly be a flyover in 2022. What if we had to pay for it? Or what if we chose the option of the the terrain vehicle that's pulling this electromagnetic machine behind it, which was something that DWR suggested as a possibility for us, with a price between 10 and 20,000, which didn't sound like a lot of money to me. And so my question was, where's the funding for something like that? I know the Cal Poly is no expense because we're partnering with Cal Poly, but if we wanted to do a survey, do you have the funding? Where would it come from? Thank you.
There's no more public comment at this time.
Thank you. Excuse me, Daniel, would you like to respond to any of those questions?
Yeah. Sorry for misinterpreting that question, but I can answer it. For a low-cost geophysics survey, I would think that the BMC, if identified that as being a priority, could fund that. The BMC currently has a contingency budget, has an adaptive management budget, and so if approved by the directors and prioritized, that could be a funding mechanism for that type of initiative. There obviously it's different, but there are a lot of parallels. The BMC did jointly fund the new monitoring well to collect new and better data on the status of the groundwater basin. And so I think this would fall under a similar category. With respect to the totem, my limited understanding is that unfortunately that technology would face some of the, and if not more, restrictions associated with the potential environmental impacts than the Cal Poly electroresistivity survey. One involves students laying a line along a transect and collecting data. The other one would involve driving an ATV or some sort of off-road vehicle along the same or similar location.
Anything else, Daniel?
Yeah, there were a number of comments made about recycled water, and I guess I would just take the opportunity to remind everyone that one of the initiatives in the calendar year 2021 work plan is the recycled water beneficial use analysis. This will be at least an initial evaluation to confirm and republish all the different opportunities for using the recycled water in the Los Osos system and what are the best and highest uses for that resource. So that initiative will include information on the benefits of using recycled water to offset ag irrigation, the benefits of using that recycled water as part for creek discharge and direct recharge, and then also the contrasting that with the benefits of using that recycled water resource at Basin or as a way to offset potable water use for landscape irrigation throughout the community.
Okay, anything else, Daniel?
It's just one other thing. The funding and organizational committee is definitely including in the dialogue an AB 1600 study and potential development impact fee as one of the funding mechanisms. But is looking at all the different mechanisms available to the BMC and evaluating the pros and cons of the different opportunities.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, so we'll move on then to item 8A.
Were there going to be any director comments about?
Oh, I asked if there was any comments. If you have a comment, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I thought you asked if there were questions, but so I have a continuing, I'd like to add to the comments that Director Zimmer made at the last meeting about the status of BMC initiatives on page 2 of the executive director reports. But before I start, I'd like to thank Dan for the work he puts into this, and my comments are in no way a criticism of his work here. I just want clarification on this part on page 2 with regard to the sustainable yield figures, or a desire to prove up on a sustainable yield figure for the 2021 annual report. The stipulated judgment is pretty clear on this. I think there's an error in this statement in this paragraph, and I just want some clarification, but that the sustainable yield figures must be approved. Any change in sustainable yield figures must be approved by a vote of the board, unanimous vote of the board, in the year prior to the reporting date. So I think that this statement made in status of BMC initiatives is incorrect. For instance, that the sustainable yield figure for the 2021 annual report, which is our next annual report that we'll be voting on, looking at a draft of and voting on next year, any changes to the sustainable yield figure presented in that report must have been approved by a vote of the board in 2020, the year prior to the reporting year. So because of that confusion, I guess I'd like to ask Dan to remove this statement, the second sentence in that paragraph under status of BMC initiatives, because it's confusing and I believe it's incorrect.
Is that it, Charlie? Oh, he's muted. Okay. Mark, did you want to talk? I guess not. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, yep, we're good. Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is Bruce. I don't have any comments, and I think it'd be helpful to get on to the next item, specifically talking about sustainable yield. I'm sorry to say that I have a hard stop at 3:35 to get to another meeting, and my alternate is available only for about another 15 minutes after that. I'm sorry for the squeeze on that, but I look forward to getting started on the next item.
Okay.
Hey, Marshall, just real quick before we do that, I'm sorry, my phone was on mute, but and I agree, we do need to keep moving forward, but just on the WRFP funding, is that a cumulative for the basin, that 75, or is that by each project? Because the list of projects that I see Dan has here, we could qualify for many of those projects, and some of them, you know, like the soil aquifer treatment, I remember that having a somewhat of a low cost, maybe 50,000 or something of that nature. It would be great to keep that project moving, you know, as part of the creek discharge. And then in addition to the transient model, I believe Bruce mentioned the county having some funding. I'd like to come back to that and look at what exactly, or have a better definition of the cost of that transient model, and see what that cost would be per each agency, and try to get that incorporated into our budget. And then just for the grant funding, is this expected to expire at some point? Are we under time constraints to implement and secure this funding?
Thank you, Mark. Dan, would you like to respond to those questions, please?
Yeah, I can respond to the funding questions. First, I'm not aware that this program is going to expire. So that in discussions with them, they have plenty of money at this point and are looking at ways to expedite the allocation of that money to eligible projects. Not each one of those individual projects would be eligible for an individual grant. I would suspect that they would, my understanding of that program is they would want the study to include evaluation of all those different opportunities as part of the alternatives analysis and compare those relative to other recycled water or supplemental supply opportunities. So probably limited to 150K in grant funding for one project in the near term. If at some point into the future, after completing that first project, there was an additional different scope that was envisioned, that may be eligible, but likely in the near term, we would be talking about one project from that program. And then the model funding costs and discussions, we're having those discussions and starting them at a BMC party staff level. We'll have a meeting next Tuesday to further those discussions. The dollar numbers that we've used previously for budgeting are in was $185,000 to develop an updated transient groundwater model. And that number would go up or down just based on the level of peer review and then the number of scenarios that you might want to run with the updated model. And then back to Director Cody's comment, I would agree that removing that sentence from the status of BMC initiatives would be prudent, given that our next item will be included a discussion around the sustainable yield estimate and sort of the first and the procedure for how the BMC would take on evaluating that and incorporating it into the annual report. So given that hasn't been determined, premature to have this description in here with respect to the timing, and so just removing it at this point until we have a better understanding of the direction the BMC wants to take with the sustainability yield update procedure would be prudent.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. All right, no action is required on this item. If there's no other comments, let's move on to the action item, item 8A. Excuse me. Item 8A, requirements, framework, and methodology for preparation of the ISJ required annual report. The recommendation is to receive information on the requirements, framework, and methodology for the required annual report and provide direction to staff. So Daniel, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so this item is one we've talked about for a bit of time, and so I'm excited to bring this item to the Basin Management Committee. What I have for you today is an overview of the requirements for the sustainability yield component of the annual report, and we're bringing this item to the BMC and the public really as an opportunity to improve everyone's understanding of the sustainable yield estimate. What is the calculation methodology? What are the key assumptions that go into that? And then to begin talking about a framework for how an update to the sustainable yield estimate can incorporate into the BMC's processes and procedures, and then ultimately into the annual report. There really is no intention at this one, my part, to make any formal decisions with respect to the sustainable yield estimate number today. This is really, again, a review of the framework and methodologies and an opportunity for the BMC to provide input into the methodology, to ask questions, and to provide direction to staff for how to proceed with updating the sustainable yield estimate moving forward. So if we move to the next slide. Just a little background, the BMC is required to prepare and submit an annual report to the court. One of the components of the annual report is to provide a continuously updated hydrologic assessment of the basin, its water resources, and sustainable yield. And so a critical component of the annual report and the BMC's 2020 work plan is to review and update the sustainable yield estimate. Next slide, please. The definition as specified in the basin yield is that the sustainable yield equals the maximum amount of groundwater that may be extracted from the basin in year X without causing seawater intrusion to advance further inland or with a stable seawater intrusion front, and with no active well producing water with chloride concentrations above 250 milligrams per liter. The amount of water that can be extracted under this definition is determined using the Los Osos MODFLOW, or numeric groundwater model, created for the Los Osos Basin. And additional information on that model is included in the staff report and the basin plan. There are a number of key assumptions that are incorporated into the model when the model is utilized to develop sustainable yield estimates, and I've outlined those here. The first one is the assumption with respect to precipitation. The current assumption is that there will be 17.5 inches per year precipitation in the model. The model is a steady state model, so that amount of precipitation is constant year over year because of the limitations of the current model. However, that number was developed, it was obtained from previous versions of the model and verified based on an evaluation through the US EPA climate resilience, which looked and a review of the 1981 to 2010 base period for the Morro Bay Fire Station, which had an average rainfall of 17.48 inches per year over that time. The stream flow assumptions in the model are limited to 800 acre-feet per year and is constrained by the stream bed seepage capacity and allowed to be approximately 20% of the average watershed runoff. Recycled water. The recycled water delivery assumptions in the model include 448 acre-feet per year of water delivered to Broderson and 33 acre-feet per year to Bay Ridge Estates. And then the final assumption described on this page is the assumption with respect to sea level. Sea level in the model is assumed to be 0 feet NGVD 29, datum NGV 29, which is roughly equivalent to a 2.72 foot number under the NAVD 88 datum, and is roughly equivalent to the mean sea level at the Port San Luis buoy. Additionally incorporated are in the model are pumping assumptions. And there really are two different types of pumping assumptions. And I'll start with the non-purveyor pumping because in some ways they're a little simpler. So the assumptions in the model are that non-purveyor pumping is fixed, and the volume, extraction volumes of those non-purveyor pumping are listed in the table here, with 750 acre-feet per year for agricultural, private domestic at 220, Sea Pines Golf Course at 50, and Memorial Park at 50. These assumptions, again, are fixed, so they don't necessarily vary based on estimates of ag pumping year over year. And so the 750 acre-feet per year of ag pumping is actually larger, and it's intentional. It's larger than the actual estimated amount of ag pumping in the annual report. On the alternative side, the purveyor pumping is really the variable that is changed when developing a sustainable yield estimate. So, and so the way that this works, based on my understanding, is the purveyor pumping is adjusted up until the point that the 250 milligram per liter chloride constraint is reached. And those adjustments are done, are optimized within the model based on the assumptions of available infrastructure, or primarily which wells are active and at what capacities. And they're adjusted with the goal of shifting the overall pumping from the basin from the lower aquifer to the upper aquifer, and from the western portions of the basin to the eastern portions of the basin. And it's the amount of pumping that the model identifies that can be achieved without exceeding, and I should say the amount of purveyor pumping that the model identifies that can be achieved without exceeding the 250 milligram per liter constraint is the number that is determined and ultimately when added to the non-purveyor pumping, creates the sustainable yield estimate for the basin. We go to the next slide. There are a number of requirements within the stipulated judgment in the basin plan with respect to the sustainable yield estimate, as Director Cody referenced. And I've listed 2 of those requirements here. So prior to the start of each year, following the commencement of the stipulated judgment, the Basin Management Committee shall establish the sustainable yield for that year based on the conservation implemented and the basin plan infrastructure then developed in the basin and the model. And then additionally, with unanimous consent, the Basin Management Committee shall annually evaluate, confirm, and set the sustainable yield. Any change to the sustainable yield shall be based on the best available and then existing data and evidence. On this slide, we have just a timeline of the sustainable yield estimate. I'll just hit some of the high points. All of this information is included in the staff report, but in 2015, the basin plan established a sustainable yield at 2,450 based on 2012 infrastructure assumptions. The stipulated judgment rounded that number down to 2,400 acre feet per year. In 2016, the 2015 Basin Annual Report included a sustainable yield estimate of 2,450 acre feet per year based on infrastructure assumptions available at that time, and that was unanimously approved by the BMC. In 2017, Cleith Harris geologists prepared a basin yield metric, TM, paraphrasing there, which included an updated estimate of 2,760 acre feet per year for the sustainable yield based on the completion of certain elements of programs A and C. That annual report then developed for 2016 additionally included the 2,760 acre feet per year sustainable yield and was unanimously approved by the BMC directors. In 2018, 2019, and 2020, the sustainable yield estimates included in the corresponding 2017, 2018, and 2019 annual reports remained at 2,760 acre feet per year, and each of those annual reports was unanimously approved by the BMC. Fast forwarding to 2021, at our last meeting, the 2020 annual report included a 2,760 acre feet per year sustainable yield estimate. That annual report was approved by the BMC for submission to the court. However, in its motion approving the 2020 annual report, the BMC clarified that approval of that report should not be construed as evaluating, setting, or establishing the sustainable yields under the terms of the stipulated judgment, and directed staff to conduct a review of the sustainable yield estimate and stated that major infrastructure decisions would be deferred until the updated sustainable yield is reviewed and approved by the BMC through a more formal process in accordance with the requirements of the stipulated judgment. So if we go to the next slide, this is just a first proposal at a process for how the sustainable yield would be reviewed and updated by the BMC. Obviously open to input from the BMC directors on this process, but this was developed just based on interpretation of the stipulated judgment requirements. The proposed process would be that in July of a given year, BMC staff would evaluate the need to evaluate and possibly update the sustainable yield and make a recommendation to the BMC. If the BMC approved the update recommendation and the recommended parameters to incorporate into that update, staff would prepare an updated sustainable yield calculation or estimate. That updated sustainable yield estimate would then be brought back to the BMC for consideration for approval. And if unanimously approved, it would be incorporated and documented into the annual report for that year. If the updated sustainable yield was not unanimously approved, then the sustainable yield would remain the same as previously approved, and then the BMC would provide direction to staff on how to proceed. There's a couple of additional steps or bullet points in the staff report, but this description was summarized to fit on the slide. So we go to the next slide. Okay, so yeah, that's the end of the presentation. I guess probably the other thing to mention from the staff report is the financial considerations. The costs were incorporated into the calendar year 2021 budget to prepare an updated sustainable yield estimate. However, those cost assumptions were really based around a very simplified and single update using the previously approved methodology. And so I just would point out that if there is, a number of changes or a number of different estimates that are requested to be provided, then additional budget may be required to cover that level of effort. However, there currently is contingency as well as technical support adaptive management services funds available in the calendar year 2021 budget that could be put towards this additional effort if that is the direction of the BMC. So that concludes my presentation. Again, the intent of this item is to try to lay out the methodology for the sustainable yield estimate, try to address questions to the best that I can about that methodology, to receive input on the key assumptions, and then also to lay out a proposed preliminary process for how the BMC would like to move forward, both in this year's estimate of evaluation of the sustainable yield estimate, but also in future years, as required by the stipulated judgment.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Yeah, and I think that as you laid out that last slide there, which is on page 4 of your staff report, the update process is a critical part of today's discussion to come to an agreement on that process so we can start to implement it and move forward on that. So do we have any questions before we go to public comment?
Mr. Chairman, if you would indulge me, this is Bruce, just to maybe
And
make
I appreciate
a
the
couple
fact you have to leave in 20 minutes, so I get it.
Yeah, so I don't know how much public comment we're going to have on this, but I would like to just offer a couple thoughts for our way of thinking. I don't really have any questions on this. This looks like just the framework we need to do. I'm hoping that my colleagues on the committee here will take this as an opportunity to look forward. I know we've had some discussion about what has happened about determining sustainable yield in prior years. And I think it's more useful for us to look at how we make sure we're doing this clearly and defensively as we go into the future. The other thought that I wanted to get out there is just we need to really think about what sustainable yield means in terms of our approach. What are we going to use it for? What does it mean for our informing our overall management of this resource? And I think that to me, the thing that we need to really concentrate on is that this is a number that speaks to the capacity of the basin to provide a certain quantity of water over a certain time frame. And hopefully this is a long-term time frame. As we do it now, we have a steady state model. That means that we're assuming this, the inputs and the inputs and the pattern of extractions are going to be the same over some amount of time. That's going to get through periods of high precipitation and low precipitation. I really think that as we think about sustainable yield, we need to think about the average over some period of time, like 20 years or more. And when we talk about evaluating and potentially updating the sustainable yield, I don't see that as that we would be changing the sustainable yield number on a year-by-year basis, simply because rainfall happened to be higher or lower in that particular year. What we need to be planning for extractions from this basin at a level that can sustain dry years interspersed with wet years. Maybe, certainly drought periods of some reasonably expected duration within a longer precipitation pattern. So I just wanted to get out there the idea that as we talk about updating the sustainable yield, what we're really talking about is if new projects come online that change, namely improve the pattern by which we do the extraction from this basin, that allow us to extract more than we had, again, moving east, moving up in the basin, that's the sort of thing that should affect sustainable yield. If we get new information about the long-term projections, let's say, of average precipitation, that's something that we might use to update sustainable yield. But again, I hope the committee resists the inclination to decide that sustainable yield is going to go up and down with yearly rainfall, because we really do, sustainable by its nature is something that we need to think about over the long haul. I think that my final thought is one that I've expressed a number of times before. In understanding and verifying a particular determination of sustainable yield, we certainly have to relate that to the measurements we take, the metrics that we see, the concentrations of chloride and nitrate and all these other characteristics of the basin. And we can expect that those numbers are going to vary more quickly. Namely, they may vary on terms of the yearly rainfall or the average over a few years. And so that, again, to me, argues very strongly for the need to use a transient model in informing our management decisions of this basin, so that we can properly interpret the indicators that we see. So I'm fine with this. I think that as we get forward, this is going to be a really good exercise for us to do, and look forward to what colleagues have to say about it.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any other questions before we go to public comment? We'll have the discussion after. Go
I
ahead.
think I'll make my comments now before public. There might be a lot of public comment, and I know Bruce has to leave, so I'll just follow.
Okay.
Agree with much of what Bruce is saying about the long term, and not making quick adjustments. One of the things that I think is an area of confusion that maybe in this report would have been good to identify is what we discuss a lot of times in our meetings is the basin yield metrics. And I believe that gets confused with the sustainable yield. It's a component of the basin yield metrics, but until you dive into the details and really understand what's happening here and how the sustainable yield impacts the basin yield metrics, those may be confused for some of those that are just joining us or may have not have dove into it deeply. So in this process or in our future, maybe some brief explanation of that may be helpful. And then as Bruce was mentioning, right now all of our assumptions are based on modeling, and today we have results from our metrics and monitoring activities, and so we should be using those to verify any changes or presumed changes moving forward. I think that back when we had the process in place, there wasn't any data available, so these assumptions were laid out and the process was laid out to the way it is today. But right now we have some data to rely on. Regarding the estimated cost that Dan mentioned at the end, I'd kind of like to know what that is and what that scope of work would be, that process in revising it, what additional work is really needed to dive into those details a little bit more thorough. And I think that'll do for my comments for right now.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're ready to go to public comment, Laura.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. And there was a comment that came through from an anonymous attendee saying, what meeting did the sustainable yield number change from 2450 to 2760? What date? Where is the transcript? Not the annual report passing, but the actual meeting where it was a unanimously approved. All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. As we've all been talking about, the stipulated judgment outlines the methodology for adjusting the sustainable yield. It just hasn't been used for the first 6 years of basin management. The sustainable yield was increased in 2016 and again in 2017 using modeling and citing completed programs A and C, but neither of those programs were completed then, or are they yet? In addition, the model was based on faulty assumptions, such as stream flow and precipitation. We haven't had 800 acre-feet of stream flow for years, so the 20% of flow estimated to recharge the basin just isn't there. Nor have we had 17.5 inches of average rainfall over a decade. We're on a mega drought, and that could last well into the future. So the increase in the sustainable yield from the very beginning was based on assumptions and wishful thinking with no hard data to back it up. The sustainable yield is not a benign number. Increasing the sustainable yield decreases the basin yield metric, which is the stated goal of the basin plan, to reduce the basin yield metric to a permanent level below 80 to provide margin of safety for the community. But just by reducing or by increasing the sustainable yield, you shouldn't be just doing that just to decrease the basin yield metric. In the director's report, it says the current draft of the basin yield metric is 73 based on a sustainable yield of 2760 acre-feet yearly, indicating that the margin of safety not only had been met, but exceeded. Thus, surplus water could be rationalized to be used for more building. If a mandated safe yield metric of 2400 was used, the basin yield metric would actually be 84, not 73, indicating the margin of safety for the community has not been reached. Last month, the 2020 AMR was only a draft waiting for corrections. The sustainable yield was discussed, that the mandated procedure for increasing it was never followed, and that it should remain at 2400 until it was. But it was approved in a rush to get it to court, with a sustainable yield to be discussed later. Well, later is now. We urge the committee to reject the basin yield metric of 73 because that is accepting the sustainable yield at 2760 when there was never any conclusive or compelling evidence to increase the original mandated 2400 acre-feet yearly. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Babak, you're able to speak. You just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. My comments are going to echo Patrick's to some extent. First, I wanted to address Supervisor Gibson's comment that we must look forward, and that's the best way to go. I would ordinarily agree with that assessment, but here we're tethered to this 2760 figure, which is going to be, if nothing changes, is going to be used as the baseline if any future efforts to adjust the sustainable yield doesn't garner unanimous support. So I think this figure is problematic, and I think it's the record's pretty clear that it's not legally defensible because it was not arrived at through the proper procedure. And what record is available suggests that this number was an adjustment that was made to the previous sustainable yield number was sort of this mechanical adjustment based on this concept that additional infrastructure has come online, which wasn't true, but certainly there's no record that when this number was arrived at, the BMC used, quote, the best available then existing data and evidence. So that number is not defensible. And I think any moving forward to come up with a new sustainable yield has to be very clear-eyed about the fact that that number can't be used. As far as the methodology that's spelled out for proceeding, I think it's really important for the methodology to incorporate this concept of using the best available data and evidence as one of the chief mechanisms by which the sustainable yield is evaluated. Because if you read what is there now, it seems like it's really a question of improving or adjusting upwards the sustainable yield as new infrastructure comes online, without regard to the evidence and monitoring reports, which is clearly, I mean, comments today echoed the need to really look at the sustainable yield number through that lens. So I urge the committee to ask and to revise the methodology to make it really clear that sustainable yield number would have to incorporate all the available evidence. And I want to echo the sentiment that the precipitation assumptions may have been appropriate when the Basin Plan was first adopted are clearly not reliable anymore. And especially if going forward, that's going to be one of the bases on which it's the sustainable yield is recorded, that we must be.
You've reached 3 minutes. Thank you.
Let me just finish my sentence.
Marshall, is that okay?
He can finish this sentence, yes.
That's what I'm hoping to do. I just think that if we're going to be relying on this number, that it's important that we make sure that the 17-inch assumption is still warranted. Thank you.
All right, Keith, just unmute yourself and you're able to speak.
Thank you. Keith Weimer, Sustainability Group. I'd first like to get some clarification regarding the annual report drafts that were submitted to the court. We noticed that the first draft of the annual report issued in May of this year is on the BMC website, not the draft with the revisions that Cleith Harris made based on input from the LOSG and others. The latter is the one you approved and it should have gone to the court. Please clarify and assure us that this draft went to the court. Regarding the proposed new procedure, I will echo a little bit of what Bobak just said. The chronology and the proposed procedure that you have presented implies that you decided to increase the sustainable yield from 2,400 to 2,760 in 2017 based on the 2016 annual report, simply by approving the report. And then you approved the 2760 every year since then by approving annual reports. The stipulated judgment states that unless conditions warrant an adjustment, the sustainable yield will remain at 2,400. Clearly, conditions didn't warrant a change in 2016 because the best available then existing data and evidence didn't support a change. The chloride and water level metrics, which the Basin Plan provides to assess basin conditions, showed seawater intrusion conditions at their worst and deteriorating. The most recent data isn't much better. Seawater intrusion is still progressing. This agenda item assumes you agreed and are agreeing now that you reset the sustainable yield based on changes in conditions and the best available data. I submit that you didn't, and you should not agree that you did by approving this item. And that you should affirm that the 2,400 remains in effect and reject the new process because it assumes that you have already established the 2,760. In other words, what gets presented next from the BMC staff will likely be an update or increase from that. What you decide on this issue sets the tone for the BMC in the future and how you will adjust climate change and other pressing issues. You have a chance to make a decision protective of the basin and the community, or to make your decision based on unproven modeling predictions that support a lot more development. As homeowners and water customers, we ask you to make a decision protective of the basin and of your customers. Thank you.
Bruce, can you please let me know who your backup is so I can put them in?
Yes, that's Kate Ballantyne. Kate Ballantyne in there. Thanks, Laura, very much.
No problem. Thank you. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Edwards. And for one thing for sure, I don't support any additional money for WSC, no budget adjustments. Your committee's paid for this analysis once already by way of Cleith Harris Group. While it's not perfect, we're not in a perfect business here. So no budget increases, please. And, you know, I listened to some of the comments, and notwithstanding the rhetoric, this equation, this isn't rocket science. We're talking about 2,760 acre feet less 2,450. That gives me 310 acre feet that we're squabbling over. We know that the program C #1 well, Golden State's Los Olivos well, has been pegged at 110 acre feet. So 110 from 310 equals 200 acre feet per year. There are several projects. The Upper Aquifer CSD project on 8th Street, that may have been included, perhaps prematurely, but that well's almost done. We've got the South Bay nitrate removal facility by the CSD, and then there's the Rosina nitrate removal and blending by Golden State. I mean, those equal 200 acre feet. I just don't know what all this commotion is about. I think it's a distraction, really, because these numbers are generalized. We're going to cross-check them with other data, but we're wasting time talking about minor issues. Our target safe yield for the basin, all things considered, build out and everything, is about 3,000 acre feet. I think we ought to use that for discussion purposes. That includes the completion of all the Program A projects, as well as the completion of all the Program C wells, all three. They will give you a safe yield of about 3,000 acre feet. Let's use that as a target. Keep it simple. Let's not spend any more money on consultants, staff, and this debate. It's a nowhere debate. It takes us nowhere. Thank you.
Am I up right now, Larry? Hi, my name's Larry Rayo. You know, I listened to, I agree with other members of my group and what they've said. I listened to Supervisor Gibson and Jeff Edwards, and it just seems that they're hell-bent on growth and development. And the data shows that we haven't really had the seawater intrusion is still occurring. So the numbers must be wrong. I don't think it's, necessary to sit there and keep, deciding how much further, higher we can go with a sustainable yield when the data just is showing the opposite. We need to adopt the sustainable yield to reflect what the data is saying and get it down to a number to where the sustainable yield actually meets with the data that we're supplying. If you look back in 2016, when the 2400 was changed to 2760, the condition wasn't met by the definition of sustainable yield. There was chloride levels above the 250 milliliters of chloride. The Rosina well had chloride levels at 299 in spring and 389 in the fall. So, you know, if you ask yourselves, would you have approved that sustainable yield if you knew that? I think the answer is no. You know, I don't think you would have affirmed that. And as far as this agenda item as it's written, I don't think it's clear enough. I think the process that was in place prior to this change that you're requesting actually worked. It just wasn't followed. And now that you're more clear on how to follow it, I would just go with the way it's set up, because I think that the way it's written now, it's going to be more using the model, and it's going to be less protective of the basin. So, you know, you're going to be making, you know, important decisions right here. And I think that you need to use more quality metrics and clear measurable objectives to show that seawater intrusion has reversed, and try to get the sustainable yield to actually start meeting the data, and then work forward. Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again, Lindy Owen. You know, looking at the precipitation dates that were used, 1981 to 2010, describes 17.48 as our average annual rainfall. Well, that's 11 years old. And so you're already on old data that I think definitely reevaluating the sustainable yield and probably bringing it back for caution reasons to 2400, 2450 makes a lot of sense. And I really hope that you will go take a look at this. I also looked, is the Memorial Park getting 50 acre feet of recycled water? As far as I know, they're not hooked up yet. What I sort of see again is if this whole, you know, putting pumps or wells in the east side is supposed to save water, I think you need to remember that what you're doing is trying to stop seawater intrusion. And so far it is not working. Even conservation has had very little effect on how the seawater intrusion is moving. You can go ahead and put wells on the other side of the basin, but it doesn't mean that that makes more water. My common sense just questions where a lot of these actions are supposedly going to produce more water. I think that caution is really important right now, and I think getting the data corrected is extremely important to how we advance and do what we need to do to come up with a sustainable yield number. I don't feel comfortable with the fact that it changed for no real reason. So I would urge that we go back and definitely straighten up what is the true sustainable yield according to the data that we have. And with the seawater intrusion not having reduced itself with rising nitrates, I don't think that 2760 is anywhere close to correct. And I just urge caution. Thank you.
All right, Deborah, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Deborah Howe. Better data and more complete data seems to be critical to making these decisions. I would urge the committee to avail themselves of some of this technology. Waiting for Cal Poly to get around to doing a static survey probably doesn't make much sense. Let's get moving, get some better data. And I think a lot of these answers could be more easily answered. Thank you.
There's no further public comment at this time.
All right, thank you. We'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee. I think that talking about methodology and process, and based on what I heard, you know, I think we need to use all available data that's available and, you know, practice our modeling on that. I would like to just make on page 4 of the staff report, the proposed sustainable yield update process. Based on public comment, what I would propose here is an item number 1, where it says beginning in the year, beginning in July of a given year, BMC staff will evaluate. I'd like to change that to say beginning in July of a given year, BMC staff will evaluate the sustainable yield. Not the need to, but just each year we would evaluate the sustainable yield. So I would make that suggestion here as far as a recommendation. Okay, so let's go to public comment, or pardon me, comment by the committee members. I just wanted to lay that out there as my thought from the get-go as to the process, because based on what I heard, I think we need to do this on an annual basis, not just decide every year whether we're going to do it or not.
Marshall, just to comment on your comment, so would we do that this year since
Yes.
we are in July?
Yes.
Okay. And then to further add comment to it, you know, these assumptions that we're looking at, the precipitation and it being 11 years, you know, the average is 11 years old, and stream flows and all of these assumptions, could we, I don't know what it takes to run the model or revise the run of the model that calculated this using updated assumption information. In addition, can there be inclusion of the metrics and the monitoring results in some way included in our model run in predictions? Is really what I would like to understand. And if we could add that to the process, that, you know, we use maybe the metrics and modeling information from the previous annual report when we do the update in July. I don't think that's too much of an effort to plug those numbers into the model that we have today.
I think that makes sense, Mark. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'd like to, Marshall, suggest that we modify that paragraph that you're talking about and provide just a little bit additional clarification beyond what you suggested, that according to the stipulated judgment, the committee must approve any changes in the sustainable yield number in the year prior to the reporting year. So I think we need to add that and maybe clarify even what that means.
Yeah.
Since this is the reporting year for the 2021 report that we would be discussing next year, this year, during a meeting where we discuss a sustainable yield number change, we would have to be discussing that for the 2022 report. So I think that Director Gibson is correct that there are two issues here involved here. One is, how do we proceed going forward to correctly follow the stipulated judgment instructions? And the other second thing, which is less important perhaps right now, is about the historical what happened part of this. So before I go into my opinions about the historical version of what happened, because I disagree with the presentation in this memo, I'd like to see if we could discuss the procedure going forward.
Charlie, I don't mean to question your interpretation of the reporting year, but are you certain that the reporting year wouldn't be 2022 for the 2021 annual report?
I'm just saying that my interpretation is, for instance, this year we discussed the 2020 annual report. and voted whether or not we would approve that report.
Right.
The reporting year for that 2020 annual report is 2020.
Correct.
So any approval of a change in sustainable yield figure, according to the stipulated judgment, would have had to have been made in 2019, the year prior to the reporting year. And I think that, let's see if we can all agree that that's true.
I would need to have either Jenna or Erica speak to that, because I don't necessarily agree, but I'm not sure.
And I don't agree with it either. I would think that it would be in 2020, or let's just say, yeah, what we reported this year would have to have been clarified in 2020 and approved in 2020. So for this year, we can evaluate and adjust the sustainable yield for our reporting year of 2022 on 2021 data.
Then I think that is, I don't interpret the stipulated judgment that way. So that's an important thing that I think the committee should agree on, is what the real policy is as described in the stipulated judgment. Because if we say, for instance, what you're suggesting, I think, Marshall and Director Shilsky and Director Zimmer, what you're suggesting is that when we voted on the 2020 annual report earlier in June, that the reporting year for the 2020 annual report was actually 2021 in your interpretation. Is that correct?
No. No, and I didn't say I disagreed with you. I said that we would need to have legal counsel weigh in on that.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I think that that's the crux of the issue about how we proceed going forward, is we need to agree on that, how we interpret the rules given to us by the stipulated judgment.
Okay, but if we go through that update process that's laid out there.
The historical process?
No, on page 4, that would take all that into account. So I'm not sure what difference it makes in the process.
Well, it makes a difference in.
It would be what that all that would do is what sustainable yield would be the basis for that report. That's the difference, but we'd still do it on an annual basis.
Sure, on an annual basis, but in what year would we have to agree on a change of the sustainable yield figure for a particular reporting year?
Well, my recommendation, Charlie, is we would do it every single year.
Yeah, but so if we did it this year, I have a difference of opinion with the way that this memo is presented. In the memo, there's an implication that we could decide to accept a value for a sustainable yield now during 2021 that would be used during the reporting year of 2021. And I disagree with that.
Well, we have to, again, I'm just saying we should do this every year. What year we use would be dependent upon the answer to your question.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Charlie, the intent of the methodology that's laid out is not to have it go retroactive now, and maybe there are ways to improve the wording, but an update of the sustainable yield developed now in July or in 2021 would be for the year 2022, and it would take into account infrastructure projects that were completed or anticipated to be completed before the end of 2021. Now, documentation of that sustainable yield for 2022 might be described in the 2021 annual report, but it that sustainable yield estimate, as I understand it, would be for the year 2022 and not retroactive back to 2021.
So when you say for the year 2022, you mean for the 2021 annual report, which we approve in 2022?
No, I mean for years in the year 2022.
For
It
the
would be the sustainable yield that we
For
would use for the
2022.
2022 report.
okay, then we agree on that then. Yes.
Okay, well, sorry
We're
for
in
the
agreement.
confusion.
I was confused about the wording and so in 2021, this year, we could approve a figure for a change in the sustainable yield figure for the 2022 annual report. And I would agree with that.
Yes, that's what we were trying to say. I'm sorry for the
Okay,
confusion.
so I just want that spelled out very clearly then, because I think it's not right now in the present language.
Well, and I think the other thing we need to work through is putting it in the annual report is not the only use of that number. There are other uses of the sustainable yield estimate, as described in the stipulated judgment. It's divided into the purveyor pools, the agricultural pools, and has other implications associated. So when I say for use in 2022, I mean for actual use in 2022 as part of the stipulated judgment, the basin management requirements.
So what, I know Kate's gonna have to leave if she hasn't already left, but,
I'm still here. I do have a question though before I go.
okay.
Dan, could you describe, based on Marshall's language tweak of the evaluating the sustainable yield every year, can you just let me know what that means as far as workload goes? Is that, from your perspective, what does that mean for you?
Yeah, so I mean, I think as we described earlier and is described in the report, I mean, the need to update the sustainable yield, and Director Gibson referenced as well, is not just based on any annual change in rainfall or change in production. It's changes in infrastructure available to manipulate pumping within the basin, or any sort of significant change in our understanding of basin conditions. And so if there was no change in the infrastructure, and by infrastructure, I primarily mean wells, in a given year, and there was no dramatic change in our understanding of how the basin, the basin assumptions, then I don't believe that it would warrant an update to the sustainable yield, because all the same assumptions would be the same as the previous year. So that's what it was referred to in evaluating the need to update the sustainable yield. It's evaluating the change in conditions from the previous year and then making a recommendation on whether those change in conditions would warrant updating the sustainable yield estimate. In terms of level of effort, obviously that doesn't take that much time. Was a new well constructed or not? Or, did we do some new hydrogeologic study that dramatically improved our understanding? So that's not a significant level of effort. In terms of updating the sustainable yield estimate, it's my understanding with the current methodology is it's not necessarily a significant level of effort either. That, once the assumptions are established, the actual act of performing the calculation is, it's an iterative, pumping rates are adjusted within the different wells to calculate the amount of yield that could be achieved without exceeding the criteria. But it's not, I think what Cleith Harris budgeted for this year's updated sustainable yield estimate was only $2,000 or $3,000, because it again doesn't necessarily take that much if we use an existing methodology. Now, if there's significant modifications to the methodology, or there are a desire to run sustainable yield estimates under a number of varying assumptions, like doing different sustainable yield estimate scenarios, obviously that would lead to an increased cost, presumably, in a $2,000 range for each, potential scenario. And granted, these are costs that would really be borne by Cleith Harris. And so when there's a reference to additional costs required, that wouldn't be for the executive director, that would be for the BMC's hydrogeologist to make those modifications, run those additional scenarios, and then develop any sort of documentation that would be required to support a change or a verification of the sustainable yield estimate.
Yeah, Kate, and my language proposed was we would evaluate it each year so it didn't become outdated. So it doesn't mean that we would change the number every year. It would just be we would evaluate it every year.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. And Dan's explanation of what that work effort is was really helpful. So okay. Yeah, I definitely would support that change in language too then.
Okay, great. So are we good to go on this item with that direction to staff, or do we want to have further discussion?
I have another comment related to the historical presentation of what happened since 2015. I don't agree with the historical perspective of what happened as far as approvals and all that go. That at the very beginning for the 2015 annual report, there was an increase in the sustainable yield figure that could not have been approved properly in the rules according to the stipulated judgment. There's no way that could have been in the sustainable yield figure could have been increased from 2,400 to 2,450 acre feet. And I understand what Jeff Edwards says, that this is a drop in the bucket and so on, but just to be correct, I don't think that anyone could argue correctly that was done properly. And also going on down through the years in that historical presentation, there's an implication that a vote to approve any particular annual report was also an approval by the Basin Management Committee of a changed sustainable yield figure that had changed for that report, because that vote would have to have been done in the previous year. So I also don't believe that there's any valid argument, although I'd like to listen to some, that supports the historical presentation in this memo. And that's the end of that statement.
Well, I just want to interpret, I guess my interpretation of how that's stated is that the sustainable yield estimate included in the annual report either changed or remained at 2760, and the report was unanimously approved by the BMC. Is the concern that the annual report wasn't approved, or that the sustainable yield estimate specifically wasn't approved? But I don't believe that's what is being stated.
Okay, I'm sorry then, Dan, and I hope I'm the only one who misinterpreted that. I thought that historical perspective was implying that sustainable yield figures were correctly approved as a part of approving those annual reports. And that was wrong. You don't believe that either, so we have no difference of opinion then.
Great, thank you. All right, so Mark, do you have anything to add, or can we go with the proposal that I made?
Yes, let's go with the proposal that you made.
All right, you're on board with that, Charlie?
Yeah, and so that paragraph you were talking about modifying, I hope we also clarify what this stipulated judgment means by
right. We'll include that in here. Yes, about the prior year.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Thank you all for that participation in that item. So that brings us down to item 8B, the update on the status of.
Marshall, maybe before we go to the next one, I think it'd be helpful just to clarify that direction for the staff.
Okay.
So we got direction to change the proposed procedure to say evaluate the sustainable yield on an annual basis, not the need.
Right.
And then also to work through the formal process in accordance with interpretation of what the process laid out in the stipulated judgment. So we'll revisit that to make sure that it's consistent and clear which years and reports would be impacted by this process. But and then I guess I don't want to just make the assumption, but by getting that direction from the BMC, then given that it's July, BMC staff would begin an evaluation of the sustainable yield estimate. I just want to confirm that that is, and so that we would begin at a staff level working through our understanding of basin available infrastructure, the key assumptions that go into the sustainable yield estimate calculation, and bring back a recommendation to the BMC.
Correct. That's my understanding. Mark and Charlie, you agree with that?
Yes.
Okay, then we can go.
I think I can say that I agree with that as long as we're not approving any past sustainable yield figures used in.
No, all we're talking about is from this point forward, Charlie.
Yes, that's good. Very good then. Yes.
Okay. All right. Now we can go on to 8B.
Okay. And Marshall, I'm going to hop off right now. So.
Okay. Well, thank you, Kate. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye. So 8B, update on the status of Basin Plan infrastructure projects. Dan?
Yes, and we can keep this item pretty quick. Really what we're have for you is an update on the two currently ongoing Program A and Program C projects. And so I have an update on the upper aquifer well at 8th Street provided by the CSD. So that, obviously it was drilled and cased in 2016. The design is complete and the project was awarded grant funding. The project went out to bid, and the bid closed on July 13th. And CSC staff is currently reviewing the bids for that. And so hopefully, if it's not already been published through the CSD, we'll get information on the results of those bids and the next steps moving forward, which were anticipated to be construction starting in August of 2021, which would be next month. And then with respect to the second Program C well, the CEQA or environmental document, the initial study mitigated neg deck is complete and scheduled to go to the Los Osos CSD Board of Directors on August 5th. And then followed by submittal of the minor use permit to the county, anticipated in September, and then construction anticipated to begin in Q1 2022. So that is the update on the Basin Plan projects. And, I just relevant to our previous conversation, this is the type of information that staff will be evaluating in an updated estimate of the sustainable yield, as these are projects that are being completed and that could be and as they're incorporated into the pumping regimes and the operations of the purveyors could impact the sustainable yield estimates.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Anybody have any questions? Okay, seeing none, we'll go to public comment, Laura.
If you'd like to make a public comment and you're on your phone, please dial *9. And if you're on your computer, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon again, Jeff Edwardson. A couple suggestions. I think this matrix needs to be updated, and I'll go into detail in just a second, but there's a number of things that are just simply not accurate. A suggestion to add a column to the matrix. You've got program name, project name, parties involved, and so forth. why don't we add a column that is an estimated increase in the safe yield? That might help. And as an example, it's generally understood that the upper aquifer 8th Street well will add approximately 80 acre-feet. So let's put that in. Likewise, the number 2 program C well, which has been referenced, Cleith Harris Group Tech Memo suggests that the safe yield contribution there will be another 80 acre-feet. So let's add a column, estimated addition to safe yield. Then in terms of some other details, in one of the program, the very top item, water systems interconnection between LOCST and Golden State. Well, there's an emergency connection, but there's not a real connection that can be used based on flipping a switch. That needs to be investigated. There needs to be a system. Those two, our main 2 purveyors, can intertie their system in a modern, professional way. Likewise, there's been a discussion about S&T intertying with Golden State. That's indicated as pending. Well, it's been pending for 5 years. It's a $30,000 ticket. Why can't that move to the top where S&T has a real intertie with Golden State? Then we go to the program D. That's highly unlikely, which is it's characterized accordingly. So I would agree with that. But then we go to program U, the creek discharge. We now know that there's additional money to pursue the work that's already been done on the creek discharge. And those efforts are characterized as currently on hold. Well, let's take them off hold. Then lastly, conservation ought to be on the list of infrastructure projects. And is there any wonder why we haven't seen any benefits from conservation recently? Because there has been none. I will tell you that for at least the last 5+ years, there's been almost no conservation. So it's hard to rely on conservation benefits when there is no conservation. So I like to see conservation added to the list. Thank you very much.
All right, Keith, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. Well, I just have to make one more comment about what you just decided. If you didn't agree what the sustainability yield was previously, well, what is it for the rest of this year anyway? And what do you start with when you begin to figure it for next year? Anyway, it just seems like you left it out, and you're also going to be basing your decisions apparently just on modeling parameters and what I didn't hear anything about the chloride metric or anything else. The Basin plan says that you have to assess the conditions using the metrics, and there was no mention of that. Very disappointing. The LOSO Sustainability Group submitted a list of recommended working plan priority actions, which we assume you received. As Patrick suggested, as Patrick will suggest, they are all priorities and needed to be done yesterday, actually years ago. Some requested actions are consolidated from our previous letter and some are new. And main one is that you upgrade the chloride and water level metrics and data and establish measurable sustainability goals and objectives that include ample margins of safety to ensure the basin can withstand climate change impacts. Cleith Harris has recommended improvements in data, more wells, and upgrade of the metric, and staff agrees with us that time-specific objectives are needed. It's time to begin making decisions about basin sustainability based on sufficient quality data and the achievement of measurable physical objectives that conclusively show seawater intrusion has reversed and you are pumping at a truly sustainable rate before you raise basin yield estimates or assume the basin can support more demand. That's why we say go back to the 2400 that you agreed on, and then wait until you have some data that shows you that there's success. Don't keep making projections that are just projections that are not supported. Another priority is for the BMC to ask the county not to approve development with Title 19 or without it until updated data, metrics, and measurable objectives are in place and objectives are achieved that assure a sustainable water supply for that development. In other words, start making decisions data-based. Get some proof before you estimate sustainable yields that are going to mean that the county can attempt to justify a lot more development. It's very disappointing what you just decided. Some of our priority actions are time sensitive and must be implemented in the very near future to avoid irreversible consequences. We thank you for the careful consideration of in the past.
Keith, you've reached your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I agree with Keith. There is some confusion over what you guys just decided. Are you moving forward every year with the 2,400 acre feet or the 2,760 acre feet? Please clarify that. And last week we did send you some documents outlining some of the priorities that this committee could take to help create a sustainable water basin for the present population. I'd like to stress several of those priorities. First, that you address climate change and the effects it's having now and into the foreseeable future on our water basin. Climate change will affect well pumping, where wells will be drilled, and seawater intrusion into our basin. If you ignore these facts, you're putting our basin and our community in peril. The Los Osos water basin is dependent on precipitation, and over the last decade or more, we haven't received much of an annual rainfall to set that basis. What would the basin model look like if we were only receiving 10 inches of rain annually? That would affect our stream flow, the sustainable yield would change, and stricter conservation measures would be enacted. Please don't wait. Be safe, not sorry. As revealed earlier, right now, the West, including Los Osos, has slipped into a mega drought. San Luis Obispo is in the extreme drought conditions, and exceptional drought conditions are created in other areas of the county. Most California counties are concerned about their sustainability of their own water supply. State water can no longer be relied upon. Big Ag is fallowing some of their fields because they see what's coming. We must too. We're not getting 17.5 inches of rainfall anymore. The Los Osos Creek isn't flowing with 800 acre feet yearly. History isn't going to repeat itself in our lifetime. We are in a new normal and we need to adjust to it. The current modeling metrics need to be updated now. By all measures, they are wrong. And lastly, that you implement and maximize all cost-effective mitigation projects now. These are some of the vital, bold, decisive, and immediate actions that you were tasked to take. It's time that you take them. Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Lindy Owen again. I kind of misunderstood what the direction and this decision to approve going into the 2022 report. So the committee has agreed to go ahead with data that they feel is incorrect, and yet they want to go ahead and use it for this year's report. That's one question. And secondly, maybe somebody can tell me how you get more water out of a basin by moving the straws to the other side. Again, I think trying to address seawater intrusion is of utmost importance, but the other issue is we're not getting more water in our basin by changing straws. And so sustainable yield should be used with a lot of caution because there is only so much water that is adding to the basin as we go. So if you could answer both of those questions, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
There's no more public comment at this time.
All right, thank you. So in response to the question, what we're going to do in this first year, or pardon me, this year of the sustainable yield update, we're going to take a fresh look at the modeling and the sustainable yield. So that's what I mean, that's the first item that it says right here. So, so that's what we're going to do is update the modeling, look at what we've been doing in the past, and then coming up with a recommendation, not us, but staff will come up with a recommendation for what the sustainable yield should be for this year. The second question, I don't know, does somebody else want to answer Lindy's second question?
I can provide a short response. The location of the pumping does within the basin does have a significant impact on the seawater intrusion front. Pumping further inland has a less dramatic impact on the water levels. The water levels near the coastline, which are the primary factor on whether or not seawater is intruding or receding. And so by shifting pumping further to the east, it has as a benefit, you can pump the same amount of water from a well on the east side as one on the west side and have a much less dramatic impact on groundwater levels near the coast and the seawater intrusion front.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it. Unless anybody else has any questions or comments on item 8B, Charlie?
I do. I want to talk a little bit about, and I want to thank Dan and staff for returning the S&T interconnection back into the project list. That helps a lot. And because of questions asked about this in the public and just to provide some information to this committee, I want the committee to know that S&T is presently working on a project to add a SCADA system to our well and tank level controls, our storage, which will give us the ability, it's a microprocessor-based system that will allow us then to remotely control interties and other processes located around the basin in remote places by cellular telemetry. This is the first step required for S&T to implement interties and that kind of thing and other situations. So thank you for your patience and thanks for adding this project back. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Charlie. Mark, are you done?
I just have a comment regarding the Basin Plan programs and our discussion. I think it would be helpful to add a discussion and to incorporate the monitoring results and the metrics into either this plan update or our sustainable yield. We really haven't added that in either one of these two agenda items. I think without discussing that, our discussion of the plan and discussion of the Basin Plan is somewhat misleading because right now there's a lot of focus on completing the projects and checking off the box versus actually verifying that the projects we implement are producing the results that we intend them to produce. So somehow we have to incorporate that. I didn't get that out of this meeting, but maybe in future meetings the staff could put either that in our sustainable yield or the Basin Plan project update. But I think it's important for everybody to be clear on that these projects, really the intended results are improving the basin, and we need to keep that in our discussion, not just checking off the boxes to complete the projects.
Yeah, I think, Mark, we should include it in actually both our sustainable yield analysis and in the status of the Basin Plan infrastructure projects. I think it should be included in both places.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would add to that, yeah, we haven't had explicit discussion around that, but from a staff level, that is what is envisioned, Director Zimmer. any modifications to the sustainable yield estimate would obviously impact the basin yield metric, as that is the sustainable yield estimate is the denominator for that metric. Additionally, it would impact the anticipated increases in sustainable yield associated with any potential future basin program projects. Right. And so if there is a change to the methodology, there would be a need to recalculate the anticipated increase in sustainable yield with any future projects associated with that change. And so envisioned that would be part of the process moving forward as one of the next steps. Yep. And then additionally, I agree, and we'll work with staff to figure out how can we better align, the sustainable yield estimate, the basin yield metric with the water and chloride metrics. And that'll be part of the other BMC initiative for this year, which is a reevaluation of, well, really all the metrics, but I think with a specific focus on the water level and chloride metrics.
Right, yeah.
Yep.
Sounds great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Okay, I think we'll bring this meeting to adjournment then. Our next meeting we were unable to do an in-person meeting today, but our next meeting will either be a Zoom or a hybrid meeting, depending on what the situation is. Even if we do it in person, we will do a hybrid meeting, so people will still be able to participate by means of Zoom. But our next meeting then is scheduled for September 15th, 2021. So with that being said, I will adjourn the meeting.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.